Happy Sunday, guys. How's everybody doing? Fantastic. That's good to hear. It's really good to hear. So, last week, if you were, I guess this is the sequel to Romans chapter 14. We've been doing this in-depth study of the book of Romans, right? For everyone who's been riding along on this journey through this ancient book that people would say is antiquated or whatever. I don't know. But there's several things that line up with our modern society. People don't really change. We still have the same quarrels, and we still argue about the same things, don't we? Come on. Go on the internet and look up Christmas isn't Christian, and then you'll find all kinds of videos that just pop up about Christmas, or people shouldn't celebrate Halloween, and all these different things, Because people draw a line in the sand, and they say, this is the part that I'm not going to cross, and, well, they're wrong. Because if God's true, then what? What are we? Yeah, so lightning speed yesterday, or why did I say yesterday? Last week, right, we got through 6 verses of chapter 14 in the book of Romans. So Paul's laying out this argument about passing judgment on one another. I'm just going to recap a little bit from last week, just to keep everybody fresh, get everybody charged up a little bit. He says, don't pass judgment on one another, because whose servant are they? What's the question? Paul opens that. You just count the question marks that Paul puts in the book of Romans, and you'd be astonished. I'm not going to give you that one for free. I'm going to have to charge for that one. But Paul puts question marks all in the book of Romans. And anytime, like we started this morning, didn't we, with a bunch of questions. Anytime you ask a question, you open the door to what's possible. Anytime you make a statement or a judgment, you close the door to what could be possible. Now, Paul's been talking, he's been using these fancy words like grace, and just the chapter before it. He talks about how we're all gifted, right? How grace, and we all have potential, right? That's the word. Think of in the modern context of English, right? We all have potential. Grace is the ability to see potential in someone else. So naturally, you'd think he'd move from chapter 13 to chapter 14. Because when we make statements and we say things like, you know what, this is the way that it is, and it's not going to be any different because I am the ultimate authority of whatever it is that we're taking on. When I say that, guess what I've just done? Closed the door. If I ask the question, I say, well, why would you challenge my authority? Then I open the door to find out something deeper about someone else, right? The context of this is how we live our everyday lives, right? And I had a really good conversation last week about judgment, and I made that statement that people, we try to mask our judgment in all kinds of things. And I know one of the most common statements people make nowadays is that I'm not judging, I'm just inspecting fruit. But to me, that sounds like an excuse, like you're trying to cover up judgment and what it is. Because the moment we judge, guess what we close off? The ability to see the potential of what's there. Does anyone remember the story about Joseph? Anybody? Me? Okay. Joseph. Now, was that a good story or a bad story? It was God's story, wasn't it? What they intended for what? Evil, God intended for good. Now, if you were to just read the first part of the story completely out of context, what would you say? Yeah. Well, we would use our terrible judgment and the people that we think we are, the virtuous human beings that we see ourselves as, and we would impose our own judgment on the brothers. And guess what? We'd be completely wrong. Because God's the only one who's true. He's the only one who can see the potential of every situation. And our mistake a lot of times is closing the door on someone or the people that we think we care about, and not asking the question, why would you do that? Because that's how Paul opens. He opens and he says, I'll just read through the first 6 verses. I don't think that'll take us too long, right? Or read through the first chapter, the first paragraph of the argument that he makes. He says, as for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but do not quarrel over opinions. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats. For God has welcomed him. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? Is it before his own master that he stands or falls? And he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. Now, with that said, I have some questions, right? And I like to ask questions. You guys know me. I'm always asking questions because questions make you think about it. And really, when you start thinking about it, that's when you start to change. Because we get in this phase where we're so nearsighted that we can't, all that we see is the things that are happening right in front of our face. That's all we see. Like sheep in a pasture, we just eat the grass that's right in front of us. We never look forward to see the potential of the pasture or the danger that's in front of us. So when you pass judgment on someone else and say what they're doing is terribly wrong and they should never do that, and this is the line in the sand, I'm never going to talk to that person because of what they stand for. And you close that door of communication off, you've just entered into the same trap that everyone else before you has fallen into. Now, Jesus, prime example. You guys remember Matthew? He was a tax collector. Matthew, everybody, now, in this room, how many people like the IRS showing up to your door? I mean, I've never been audited, but that's in the things that Americans fear, number one. It's number one, the IRS coming to your door, because you're afraid that they're going to take everything from you. Matthew was that guy. And who did Jesus call to follow him? That guy. And you know what the other disciples did when Jesus called them to follow him? Whoa, you shouldn't. Because here's the reality of the situation, is there's going to be all kinds of people that come in the door. Who called them here in the first place? It wasn't this guy up here on the stage. It wasn't some fancy words I said on YouTube. It's God who called him. And if I pass judgment on what kind of skirt, I used that example last week. Last week. Keep thinking yesterday because it feels like yesterday. If I pass judgment and I say, whoa, she should never be in here, guess what I've just done? I've just become the master. Because only the master can judge. Because who is it that makes me stand or fall? God. Paul's already said that. Who rises up kings and lays them low. When he was talking about authority. When he's talking about authority, who's the one who's ultimately in charge of the story? Is it your story or his story? Because a lot of times, well, we do make those decisions and we make those snap judgments. Then we realize, we come to find out, whoa, maybe I shouldn't have thrown my brother in the well. I have no idea. I had no idea of the potential of the situation. I cannot see tomorrow. But you know who can? The one who loves me. And if he loves me, then what is the troubles of today? Like Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, why do you worry about tomorrow? Why? Does today not bring enough trouble? You know, we're going back to, this is the core of the people that we should be, right? So I'm going to read through a couple verses here, and then I'll stop and we'll talk about it. You guys good? You still with me? All right. So in verse 5, and I know I kind of talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to read from verse 5 to 13. That's where we're going to stop today. So he says, one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats, eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God. While the one who abstains, abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. For none of us lives to himself, and none of us dies to himself. For if we live to the Lord. And if we die, we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be Lord, both of the dead and of the living. Why do you pass judgment on your brother? Or you, why do you despise your brother? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. All right. So then each of us will give an account of himself to God. And I know it's kind of confusing because Paul uses the pejorative of him, right? But everyone will stand in front of God and face his judgment. Now, when Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, judge not, lest you be judged, right? We always take that, and I've heard it 1,000 times, and it kind of upsets me, right? Because people will take this idea of judgment, and they get it confused with what it is to discern. What it is to discern what's good and bad for you. So, and I kind of stepped in it last week a little bit because of the questions that I got afterwards. But there is a difference between judgment and discernment. Okay? It's motivation. What's the motivation behind what you're saying or doing? So, if I choose not to celebrate Christmas, what's my motivation behind that? You guys don't know. Can you judge the motivation behind if I choose not to celebrate Christmas? But if I choose not to celebrate Christmas because I feel, I am fully convinced that it is to honor God that I don't celebrate Christmas. And that's my held conviction. Because who is it who brings us to conviction in the first place? The Holy Spirit does. So if I was to go around and tell people that you shouldn't celebrate Christmas, that you shouldn't celebrate Christmas because you're supposed to believe what I believe, what have I just done? I've just stepped into it, haven't I? I've just stepped into it because, well, now I've said everyone else is supposed to be exactly like me. And this harkens back to what Paul said in 13, where he's talking about each one of us has gifts. And he does this in Corinthians too. Each one of us has different gifts. I can feel that now as my throat's getting raspy. Some of us are good at this. Some of us are good at that. Some of us are cheerful givers. I can tell you, I'm not really good at that. It's something that I have to work on. It's really hard for me to give to someone who's never got for themselves. I'm just being completely honest and transparent. It's hard for me to do. It's hard for me to say, you know what? I'm going to reflect God's image by giving you something that you don't deserve. I'm working on it, guys, so, right? I'm not that guy. Now, when I think about it, and I'm teaching, and people tell me that I break things down and make them easier to digest, that's the idea. I'm setting the table. I'm trying to feed as many as I can with the words that I have, and I'll put everything that I have into that meal. Why? Because that's what God gave to me in remembrance of him. So when I step in the trap of judgment, it's when I go and I tell everyone else that this thing that I believe, that this day that I celebrate is the most important thing. And I elevate something trivial where it shouldn't be. I make something holy that God didn't. I raise it above everything else. So when I say Christmas is more important than Easter, and I tell all you that, then what am I doing? I'm leading you astray. Because what day is more important than any other? The day that he died for us, and the day that he rose again. Because that's where Paul ends this argument at, doesn't he? Because when we say that I am this or I am that, and we attach an identity to ourselves, right? We attach that identity and we say, well, this is where I go to church, and these are the people I'm surrounded by, and that's what makes me important in the world. What if we just elevated above God, the great I am? We've elevated ourselves. See, that's the difference between judgment and discernment. With discernment, what you do is you say, how would this decision affect my relationship with God? It's the motivation behind the things that we say. Where is our heart really at? If I go to my, I'm gonna try to give you guys an example, okay? I'm gonna try to give you guys an example. Like, well, Jesus does this all the time. He tells parables. So I'm gonna give you guys a parable. Two sons go to their father's garage where he's got a 67 cherry red Corvette Stingray, right? Beautiful car. Absolutely beautiful. Dad loves the car almost as much as he loves his sons. One son goes out there and he says, you know what? I know Dad loves his car. I love Dad. I'm going to show him how much I love him. And I'm going to wax the car. I'm going to wax the car. The other son says, you know what? I love that car. I hope Dad will give it to me someday. So I'm not even going to touch the car. I'm going to stay away from the car. And the son who wanted to go please his father, because he loved his father, instead of using wax, uses paint to wax the car. Now the 67 cherry red Corvette Stingray is covered in blue paint. And it's got little splotches all over it. And the son doesn't know what to do. And he loves his father. And he goes to his dad and he says, Dad, I'm so sorry. I messed it up. And the other brother says, look what you did. Because you chose to do something. You messed everything up. The father, knowing the motivation of his son, who do you think he approves of? The one who painted his car with blue spots. Because that's the same parable. That's the same parable as the priest, as the tax collector and the Pharisee. It's exactly the same. Because it's the motivation behind the judgments that we make that turn them not into judgments but decisions. If I see someone wearing a short skirt, okay, practical example. I'm going to move to a practical example. So everybody's with me. I know it's getting warm up here. But if I see some lady wearing a short skirt, my first reaction is, how is this going to affect everyone else in the church? Right? If I go up and I say something to her, is that going to make everyone else think that I'm bold and courageous? If that's the first thought that travels that millisecond through your head, it's the wrong thought. If your first thought is, how is the decision that I'm about to make going to affect her coming in and being my sister and loving her the way that God loved me? Because I can guarantee everyone in this room, you all have made the wrong decisions in life. Despite the wrong decisions you've made in your life and the things that you've said or did, God still called you into his assembly. Do you deserve that? Absolutely not. I don't. Do I deserve to be up here speaking and reading through Paul's letter? No. You know who understood that probably more than any of us in this room? Paul. Because you remember his story. What was he? He was the guy carrying the staff. Why do you think Paul spends so much time on judgment here? Because he knows. He knows what kind of person he was. He knows who he was. He watched Stephen, a boy, get stoned to death and enjoyed it because he thought that would please his dad. That's how quickly our motivations can get twisted into evil because we use our own judgment and we say, well, how is this going to make me more favorable to the community that I'm in? How is this going to elevate me in a way that people are going to look at me in a better way? That's why I wore the brown and black today, because they kind of don't match. I want to dress up, but not so much that people look at me and go, well, look at him. Right? Because I've noticed this working in retail. I don't know if anyone else has ever worked in retail before, but I've noticed this as a supervisor when you step over that line there, and now you're a leader, there's only two real kinds of leaders. There's only two. There's leaders that will lead because they love their people, and there's leaders that will lead because they love the power over their people. And the easiest way to distinguish one of the two, the easiest way to distinguish the two, is if one leader doesn't brag, just carries the burden. One leader doesn't seek for their own glory, but seeks for the glory of their people. Think about Moses. One leader seeks their elevation above the unit more than any other. It will point out their rank, what privilege they have. And that of the two leaders, the easiest way to tell is one of them will take credit for everything good that happened, and the other will take responsibility for everything bad. Because that's our role as leaders. So we have to learn. To become a leader, those are the things that to lead other people. To lead other people, that's the person you have to cultivate into being. Now, Jesus is my primary example of what a good leader is. I know I'm talking about leadership inside of where Paul's throwing judgment out, but that's one of the most important things when you're a leader. Because everybody, even me, I'm guilty. I'm guilty of this. When you first get a team, the first thing you notice is there's some people that do a whole lot and some people that do very little. And you think that your role somehow is to make the people who do very little do as much as the people who do a lot. That's not your role. I've tried it for years, trust me guys. 13 years in a leadership role, and it does not work. It doesn't matter how hard you beat a mule, it will not pull a plow that it doesn't feel comfortable with pulling. But I have found this, that if you're willing to pull the plow in the first place, you'll gain respect. And if people see you doing that, guess what they're more apt to do? Follow. Our snap judgments as a leader is the most toxic thing in any team environment. It's the most toxic thing because you don't know the motivation behind the person that is working for you. Maybe they have problems going on at home. There's a whole list that I could stretch from end to end of this room because not every one of us has been 100% every day of our lives. We know that. But yet when we become a leader, we're like, oh, in order for me, my boss to look at me with favor, I have to get all these people to be doing exactly the same thing. And we're just like the kid who says, you know what? I'm not going to touch the car because I want the car, and I'm going to keep it in the way that Dad wanted it in the first place. And not the kid who's willing to go out and put himself on the limb in order to please his father. Because that's what we do with our snap judgments. We think that we want the thing and not the relationship. See what I'm saying? You guys with me? We want the identity, the glory, and the honor. We want all that because, it goes all the way back to the garden, doesn't it? Because that's who we think that we are. But the thing that blows my mind, and I know it blows my mind, but I should understand it just as much as everyone else, is when they're sitting in the garden, where's Adam? Where is he? If he's a good leader, how is he leading by example? What's he doing? Because if he was there, would the story be different? Maybe. But the one thing, me and my son, we had this conversation, and I was talking about taking ultimate responsibility for our actions. And it seems like our society now, and I'm going off on a rabbi trail, so guys just strap in, bear with me, okay? It seems like our society now, we look at it, it's older now that we're adults, we look at it now and we say, look at these kids now. All we teach them to do is blame everything on everyone else, right? We say that. But when we were kids, was it any different? When Dad came to us and said, who painted the car blue? Right? Because that's where our first mistake lied. And I know I made this argument several chapters back. And I don't know why it's on my heart so heavy today. But I think it's important that we understand that ultimately the responsibility of every wrong thing that we've done is on who? It's on us. And who is willing to carry the burden of every wrong thing that we did in our lives? Jesus took ultimate responsibility for us. So we take ultimate responsibility for the people who Jesus has called into his fold. That's what real love is. When we say, oh, well, I don't know about that person. You know, their motivations, I don't know what they're doing. They're doing this or they're doing that. Guess what we've just stepped in? It's a slippery slope once you step in it. Because it feels like the weight of every burden that you've ever done and thing that you've done, you've forgotten about, right? You're the new man, aren't you? But you forget about all the mistakes that you made. Or maybe you remember them. And you're making them all over again. Because that's the first place we always go wrong. It's with our judgment. Because we want to seize autonomy and make ourselves God. We mess up every time. Every time I'm the God of my own little universe, guess what I do? Drop it in the floor. And it's always made out of glass too, which is convenient. Because it shatters all over the place. So where he's talking about this, he says the one who eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives what? Gives thanks to God. Right? What's the motivation? Giving thanks to God. Okay, we're coming up on Thanksgiving, right? Is that next week? I don't know. My calendar's so messed up, guys. This Thursday. Okay. They stopped the Black Friday thing, and we've been doing that over a successive period of time, and it's just, everything's weird, right? 2021. Welcome. Congratulations. It's almost over. And I thought I'd almost had it figured out. Shows how much I know, right? So Thanksgiving's next week. What day should we be thankful for? Good. You guys are great. A lot of times, and I'm going to speak from the perspective of the guy who sees all days alike, right? When Paul says this, he doesn't mean like he's the guy who's just like, oh, today is another day, it's going to be terrible. He's not talking about that perspective. He's talking about a perspective that almost nobody has. And I get excited for Easter every year. I don't know if you guys know this, but I celebrate Passover, and I do the whole Seder thing, and I love it. It's the only time of the year that my wife will actually sit down and cook lamb for me. Shh, don't tell her that, okay? But lamb, I love it. I don't know, it's got this, you guys have lamb before? It's so good. If you haven't had lamb, we'll have to do a Seder. I'll invite you over, we'll do a Seder, okay? But it's so good, because it's a meaning with a meal, or it's a meaning, it's got meaning, and then there's a meal behind it, and that's great. I tell my wife all the time, you know what the quickest way to my heart is, right? Through my stomach, right? Because I'm like, I will go do as many chores as you want me to do, as long as there's a hot meal waiting for me. It's hard, modern society. My wife works. She's working right now. I hope that she's not watching YouTube. But it's hard for us to get together on a daily basis. I mean, it leaves me, sometimes I feel like I'm on an island and I don't have anybody to talk to ever. So if you guys ever wonder why Adam's so talkative, yeah, you just figured it out. Congratulations. That one was free too. I'm not going to charge for that. So I'm going to speak from the perspective. It's funny. Okay, I'm going to speak from the perspective of the guy who honors all days the same. Okay? The guy who honors all days the same wakes up every day and he says, look at the sunrise. That's amazing what God has created. Oh, what all does this day have in store for me? Right? What all does this day have in store for me? What are the possibilities of today? Today can be a masterpiece if I so choose it. If I will it, it can be the greatest day I've ever lived. That's what he says. That's what that guy says. He honors all days with the same esteem because he what? What's his motivation behind it? Giving thanks to God. And I understand life gets hard. And sometimes we lose sight of how awesome just the fact that the sun rose. And it didn't really rise. God moved us toward it. You guys realize that? Like people, I do this all the time with people. It's one of those where you get them caught in it's like an intelligent trap. When you say, oh, wasn't that a beautiful sunrise? And they're like, oh yeah, it was great. And then you say, well, you realize that the sun actually didn't rise. You were propelled forward at 13,000 miles an hour through endless space and time toward that object. And they're like, exactly the look you guys have on your faces right now. Because that's the truth. Because God's always pushing us forward. Even if you tried to stand still, and not be pushed forward, even the worst person on the planet, guess who's spinning them around in a circle all the time? God. Isn't that awesome to think about? That the worst person you can think about, when they got up this morning, they are not in the exact same place that they were 8 hours before. That they've traveled through time and space at an unfathomable rate of speed to get where they are right now. And their perspective is the only thing that separates them from being righteous or evil. That's it. The way you wake up in the morning is what will determine the entire outcome of your day. So now let me speak from the perspective of the person who celebrates one day over another. Now that person who celebrates every day the same and says, you know what, today is the greatest day I'm ever going to live because it's the only day that I ever have. That's the perspective of that person. Thank God that I have this day. Right? They don't look toward tomorrow. This is the day that they have. It's my wife. She's like that. I'm different. I'm the guy who speaks from the other perspective. Okay? I'm not going to say she wakes up in a really good mood every day. It depends on how much sleep she got but she looks at every day as the same. Okay? I'm just going to say that. Me, I look at every day and I'm like, okay, today is Friday. That means I'm off tomorrow. I get so excited about it. Thank God it's Friday, right? Like I do that stuff. I'm like, hey, in 4 months, do you guys know that the Passover is coming? It is the greatest celebration ever. All my hope and everything is tied up in that day. Now, who's right? Neither one of us is right. Each one of us puts the same amount of enthusiasm into each thing that we fixate on. But what's the thing that unites the fixation? It's the motivation. That sounds really, I'm starting to sound like I don't know, poetic. It's almost poetic, right? Because the motivation behind the fixation for me wanting to celebrate Passover, or my wife being happy that she woke up today, right? Which, I mean, it takes her a little while, and I've got to not talk for at least the first hour and a half. And the few times that I do get to talk with her, the few times that we do wake up together. But she esteems that day as no more important than the other days. And it's not like she doesn't like that day or that she doesn't care about that day. It's that that's her perspective. This is the only day that she has. So she's going to live it. And you know people like this. They're kind of impulsive, right? I'm not. I'm a planner. And planners, guess what? It's Christmas is coming. Thanksgiving, do you guys know how much food we're going to eat? That's me, right? I get excited about those days. But who's right? Neither one or both. Because what's the motivation behind it? If it's give thanks to God that he made the Passover and he forced my wife to cook lamb that one day out of the year, I'm happy. I'm a happy guy. I love it. I'm thinking about Passover and the egg, and oh man, it's so good. The bitter herbs is my favorite with the kids. Just a side note here, because every year they're like, you know what, I'm not going to eat it this year, Dad. Horseradish, it just makes my eyes water and my nose. I said, that's the point, son. You have to understand. Bondage and slavery makes your eyes water, and it makes you not feel too good on the inside. It's a meal with a motivation, right? So who's right? Neither one's right. Because neither one's right if it's not motivated toward God and giving thanks to him. That's the motivation. If a girl comes in with a short skirt on, what's her motivation? You don't know. It's time to have some conversation. There's a lot of, I'm starting to rhyme too much here. I'm starting to sound like David, aren't I? No, not David. One of those preachers on TV is like, they rhyme all their words together and their whole sermon's like rhymed. I'm not that guy. I get excited and my words start to rhyme inadvertently. So he says, the one who abstains, he abstains in honor for the Lord, and the one who gives thanks to God. Because why? Verse 7, guys, verse 7. Who do we live for? Do you live for yourself? Do you? I mean, you really got to ask yourself that question. Did you get dressed up and come here today because you were wanting to raise your status in the community? Or you thought that you were the most important piece of the puzzle, that no one could be here without you? Is that why you got dressed up and showed up here today? Or are you living for something else? You're living for God. You're living for the people that he put in your life. The obligation and the responsibility that he's placed on you. Because each one of you is important. God said so. What's that, David? God stitched you together in your mother's womb. So who has more value than anyone else? Is it the one who comes in with a short skirt on? Or is it the one who's come in faithfully for 30 years and never missed a single beat? What's the motivation behind it? Do you seek to honor God or do you seek to honor yourself? I know that's kind of heavy, but it needs to be. Because when we evaluate our decisions and judgments, that's what it's placed on in the first place. I've had people in my life that I've just wanted out, Like all you've done is just been a thorn in my side. All you've done is just constantly test me in every way possible. That's the wrong motivation, isn't it? It's like trying to weave a basket underwater with your eyes closed. Because that's, you're not going to get very far. And people used to make that joke all the time, like, oh, what are you going to college? You taking an underwater basket weaving 101? But the idea is that, you ever opened your eyes in salt water or high chlorine water? I mean, you can put goggles on. But then you're filtered through something else. You ever tried to move your hands underwater in quick fashion to weave something? Yeah, it's not going to happen. Because that's what you're doing. We're always pushing against the wrong thing. Just like Paul. Remember what Jesus' statement to Paul was? Why do you kick against the goads, Paul? Why are you kicking against the goads? Because every one of us, we have to realize that it's not my judgment and how righteous I make myself. It's God's judgment and his righteousness that propels every human being on this planet at 13,000 miles an hour, right? Even right now, if we were to just stop what we were doing and said, you know what, God's not going to move me forward at all anymore, and I was to jump up and somehow magically inertia didn't take place, this building would smack me at 1,300 miles an hour and I'd just be a red spot on the wall. You guys realize that? Doesn't matter what you try to do, God's propelling the story forward. So why do I keep trying to trust in my own judgment and say, you know what, this is the fixed position, this is where I'm going to stay? You can't. Because it doesn't matter what your perspective is, God is propelling you forward. Whether today is the greatest day you've ever lived, or that's going to be 3 months away. Our judgment and our decisions, our perspective is what determines our relationship. The one who abstains, why does he abstain? We don't know until we talk to him, until you have the conversation with that person. Because the interesting thing is, when you ask somebody about something, you say, hey, why don't you celebrate Halloween? Right? There's a contentious one, isn't it? That's not contentious at all. Not in the modern church, is it? No, why do you celebrate Halloween? Right? Go talk to a Jehovah's Witness. right? They don't celebrate any holidays. I don't know if you know this. They don't wake up in the morning and say, today is the greatest day I'm ever going to live. Because they forgot something in their tenets. They forgot this right here. Well, because they had to write it out. But they forgot that God is the one in control, not 5 guys in New York in a little delicatessen. God's the one in control. He's the one who makes the earth go round, not me. It doesn't matter how hard I try, I can't stop it. No matter what I do, the story is going to propel forward. So is it going to be easier for me to, is it going to be better for me to realize that he's the one pushing me forward? Or am I going to push back? Say, you know what, I know better than he does. So this situation that he put me in, I'm going to do what I want to do. You think the brothers thought that? As they're looking at their youngest brother? How about Cain? Cain's a good example, isn't he? You know what Cain did? Cain was terrible. You go and explore that story and start asking the real questions of the motivation behind Cain. I guarantee you, you're going to open windows into your own heart that you never wanted to. Because why did Cain kill Abel? You guys can all say jealousy. And you know what that tells me? You got a problem with something. You know why Cain killed Abel? To me? You guys want to know? You want to know why he killed his brother? Because his brother was better than he was. And he couldn't live up to the standard. So he had to kill the standard. He had to take the flag down. So there was no one else to judge him against. Does that make sense? He killed the one he was supposed to be. And what did we do? Right? Exhibit A. What did we do? Because we all did that. That's on us. But he forgave us. So Paul's going to, I know I've spent a lot of time on judgment. If we live, our life belongs to who? Who's our master? The Lord. That's what Paul says. And if we die, well, we died for what? The Lord. Like, people will try to make this as murky as possible. And they'll say, well, because you're not doing X, Y, and Z in the church, right? You're not working for God. Right? I have a Baptist friend, and he's an evangelist, and we have conversations at work, sometimes at lunchtime. He's the guy at Sevierville who leaves all the little pamphlets everywhere. Okay, his name's Houston. I've got his cell phone. I've never talked to him on the phone, though. I've always talked to him in person. And he's a very interesting character because he goes to the library, and he's driven. He's on fire. And this is one of the things that we go back and forth on. And I love it because a brother is meant for adversity, right? And he's a Baptist, and I love him. He's my brother. But we both serve God. And he thinks the best way to get somebody, this is the part we disagree with, the best way to get somebody to realize that they are not the master of their own universe is to get up in their face and throw papers at them, right? Or to leave something on a urinal or a shelf, to leave little breadcrumbs everywhere that they'll eventually find their way. And I argue and I say, well, I think the best way to get somebody to realize that God loves them is to show God's love toward them. And Houston, he's a new believer. Like, he's 2 years in, and he goes, I can't remember the church he goes to. He's invited me several times. I don't think his view of me is as high as my view of him, right? Because I say I'm a Pentecostal, and he's like, you guys got snakes, right? That's the first question I always get. Like, you do the snake thing? I'm like, no, we don't do the snake thing. The little blue church, I heard that they do snakes. Oh, well, you know, come and ask the real questions, right? Come and ask the questions. Come and find if you're curious, right? But Houston, we get into this debate over what's more valuable. Now, what is more valuable? Because John the Baptist was a in-your-face kind of guy, wasn't he? He wasn't letting you go. He'd grab your pinky toe, and he wouldn't let go of it till you said uncle. That's the kind of preacher that John the Baptist was. Now, Jesus, when he preached, is that the kind of preacher he was? Now, who did both of those fellas serve? God. Now, who's right? The one who has the right motivation. And you think John was in the wilderness trying to, make a name for himself? You think he was out there, eating locusts and honey and wearing the camel fur? It had to be. The brushes weren't too well back then. It had to be a sight to see. You think he was out there in the wilderness like, you know what? They're going to remember me in the future. You think he was doing that? Or Jesus, you think he was walking around having actual conversations with people and spending time with them and healing them? Do you think he was like, you know what? I'm doing this because the whole world is going to know exactly who I am. I think that was his motivation behind what he did. Or did he care about every one of those individuals? And when we talk about judgment, we often try to make it into something that it never should have been in the first place. Because God's the one who judges. And you go all the way back to the garden. And I have this conversation with my son, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit to the conversation I had with my son. See if you glean any insight out of the conversation I had with my son. Because my son's very fervent. He will get in people's face about being homosexual or being transgender. He'll get in their face. And I'll have a conversation. And my son, I love my son. He's good. He's aiming at the right thing. Aiming at the right thing. He's got the right ammunition. I just have a different approach. Now me and my son are having the conversation, and I was having the conversation about responsibility and what it is to be a man. Because the ultimate realization that all of us want to shed is that the ultimate responsibility for our families is on us. And I'm running out of time. I know, sound guy, you're looking at the clock for me. But the ultimate responsibility for our families is on us. And I'll say that again. As the man of the household, the ultimate responsibility is on us. If our children make the wrong decisions or the wrong judgments, who is responsible? We are. And when you go all the way back to the garden, remember, God hates sin. You can't look at it. It can't be around him. If someone sees God and they have sin, guess what? They're dead. Isaiah knew this. That's why Isaiah, when he's called to the temple, God's temple, he's like, I shouldn't be here. I'm from people of unclean tongues. He knew this. You cannot go before God and be as corrupt as we are. You can't go before him. You can't look at it. He's perfect. Imperfection cannot exist with perfection. They can't simultaneously exist. So I asked my son some questions, because that's how I always get people to think about it. And I said, when in the story, when did God kick them out of the garden? Was it the moment he ate from the fruit and his eyes were opened, and all of a sudden he realized that he wasn't covered, he was vulnerable? Or was it when he tried to blame his wife? And was it when she tried to blame the serpent? If you notice one thing, the snake wasn't kicked out of the garden. Because what did the snake have to say? Nothing. And when you think about it, Paul makes this reference in this book. It was Adam who brought sin into the world. Why? Because he didn't take responsibility for what he was supposed to. He tried to blame everything else, didn't he? That's the world we live in. Because that's what our judgment wants to do. Well, if that girl wasn't wearing the short skirt, I wouldn't have had the thoughts that I had. If that person wasn't doing that, I wouldn't have been that way. If they had yielded, then I wouldn't have struck their car. We make all kinds of excuses for the bad judgments we make in life, but we never own up to them, do we? Because this book, what's this book about, guys? Righteousness. Good, good. You guys can yell that as loud as you want, anytime you feel like it. Because in order for us to live righteously, we have to first realize who we are. Step one, know who you are and know who you're not. Because I'm not God. I can't judge what the master has given, what task the master has given to that person. And I've said that before. I can't remember when I used this example. But if you're at work and you look at somebody and you say, oh, you're doing your job completely wrong. And they say, well, the boss told me that I'm supposed to do it this way. You say, no, no, no. You're doing it completely wrong. You need to do it this way. That's it. End of story. Right? End of story. You need to do it that way. That's not the right way. You thread the needle. Okay? The boss, you think the boss, and that person starts doing it the way that you told him to do it. The boss comes to that person and says, well, why are you not doing what I told you to do? Whose fault is it that that person is not doing what the boss told them to do? Well, let's say it was me. I'm the one who listened to the other person and said, you know what? Okay, I'm brand new. I don't know. I don't know any different. Whose fault is it? It's my fault still. Because they told me, my boss told me to do it this way. And this is the way that I should do it. And who are we to judge the conviction and motivation of someone else? Because your boss may have told you to be generous. Or your boss may have told you to be loving. Or your boss may have told you that there is a point in your life that you need to work on. Like being a cheerful giver. Right, Adam? You got it, Dad. So, what is the point of conviction? It's to change us, to form us into the people that we need to be. That's what we miss. We were too busy talking and trying to give out our snap judgments, aren't we? Than we are to listen. What does it say? Be quick to talk and slow. What does the proverb say? Maybe somebody can help me out with that. Yeah, because that's, who are we supposed to be? I mean, that guy took ultimate responsibility for everything that we've done. And like Paul said, he didn't just do that. He came back. Because he can bear the ultimate responsibility that we all tried to shed. He can bear it. And the mistakes that we've made in our lives, guess what? He's always there. Right next to us to talk to ask the question. We always have to be open to the answer. But we always want to close the door, don't we? We always want to say, you know what? That's their fault. That's what they did. It's not my fault. I didn't vote for that guy. This is just the way it is, and we make a million excuses, but we never own up to the responsibilities that are right in front of our faces. We're so nearsighted that we forget that our God took ultimate responsibility for everything that we are so that we could become who he is. That life, nor death, nor anything could separate us from the love of God. His love is so powerful it overcame the grave. That's why I say he came back for us. That's where our only hope exists. If you want to destroy Christianity, that's the easiest way to do it. Just prove the resurrection. But they can't, can they? 2,000 plus years running, and they still haven't found his corpse. You know why? Because there's an empty tomb. Because he came back for us. Because he cares for us. And we forget that. Every time some lady comes into the room, we want to pass that snap judgment. Who called her into the room in the first place? Same guy who called me into the room 8 years ago. He's my master. He's her master. If I come from the point of that I love my God and I love my neighbor, maybe I could ask some questions and get to the motivation behind it. Maybe I would be willing to give up, sacrifice a little bit of my time to get to know that person. Maybe I could be like he was. If I could just get over myself. Because who do we live for? Christ. If we're honest with ourselves, do we do that 24 hours a day? No. That's my challenge to you guys, my homework. And I hear some noise going on in the foyer, so I know I usually give you 15 minutes to fellowship so we can get cranked up for praise, right? And I like to get you guys cranked up for praise. It's Paul, okay? It's not my fault. I'm going to blame Paul for it. No, I'm not. I'm ultimately responsible for the message that I give you guys. But it's stuff truly to think about. Because when you sit there and you do your prayers, God answers you. You just don't want to listen. He opens doors. You just don't want to walk through. I don't know if it's courage. I don't know if it's me afraid to lose who I am. It's something I have to get over. And each day he's patient with me because he's still spinning, isn't he? He's still spinning this big blue spaceship that I'm on. So just think about it. What point in your life do you think you're living for yourself? Because none of us truly dies to ourselves. We didn't breathe life into our own lungs, and we won't remove it. So what is the Master calling us to do? Because I guarantee you, each one of you is special in his eyes. Me, I've got human eyes. I'm very nearsighted. I can only see the things that are in front of me. But God has a story, and it's greater than the one I could ever write. And I'm going to do my best to walk through every door that he opens. Amen? So, let's think about what he was willing to do for us. As we come to this praise, this time of praise, let's be thankful for the day that he's given us. Let's give him everything that we got. Even though I'm hoarse, I guarantee you, you guys know why I stand up front, so I don't blow your eardrums out when I'm singing. It's just a joke. I'm hoarse. And usually I'm not really that loud. But think of that. Think of how much stuff he's put up with from us to get us to the point where we are today. Because ultimately, we have him to thank for every day that we've lived. I'll end with a word of prayer, and then you guys can throw vegetables at me if you want. But I do love you guys. Know that. Heavenly Father, I thank you for gathering us together today. Father,